The old man's hands shook as he pulled his worn ID from his wallet. The guard at the gate barely looked at it before smirking. "Nice try, old-timer. You think this cheap card makes you a soldier?" The second guard joined in, laughing. "Probably. Bought it online. Everyone wants to play hero these days." The man said nothing. His eyes, pale blue and tired, just stared at the gate. That gate. It was the entrance he had once marched through as a young recruit. The same place where his blood, sweat, and years had been left behind. But now he was treated like a stranger. A fraud. The guards blocked his way, arms crossed, pride swelling. In their young faces, "Turn around," one of them ordered. "You're not welcome here." The old man whispered under his breath, almost to himself, "I buried brothers behind these walls." They didn't hear him, or maybe they didn't care. Cars lined up behind him, horns honked. People stared at the pathetic scene of an old man stopped at the gate. His back was bent, his coat too thin for the cold. He looked like a nobody, but one salute would change everything. Because sometimes the lowest moment of humiliation is only the shadow before the truth comes out, and the truth about this old man was bigger than anyone could imagine. His name was Thomas Reed. Most people just called him Old Tom, a widower, a quiet man, someone you'd pass in the grocery store without a second look. He lived in a small rented apartment downtown. No medals on the wall, no framed pictures of him in uniform, just silence, coffee, and the memories he never shared. Neighbors thought he was just another lonely senior. Some kids even mocked him when he limped down the street. They didn't know, no one knew, but on this day, Tom had a reason to return to the base. He had received a letter simple, short, with an official stamp. It was an invitation to a memorial ceremony, a gathering for fallen heroes. Tom had almost thrown it away. For years, he avoided events like this. Too many ghosts, too much pain. But something pulled him back this time. Something inside whispered, "Go, they must not forget." So, with his old cane and a faded ID, he walked up to the gates of the place that had shaped his entire life. What he didn't know was that walking through those gates again would uncover secrets. It would test the patience of young soldiers who had no idea who they were mocking. And it would lead to a salute that would echo far beyond the base walls. Because Thomas Reed was no ordinary veteran, he was the kind of man whose story could change how people see honor forever. Thomas had always been a man of silence. He never told stories about war at the bar, never bragged about medals he once held. In fact, most people believed he had never served at all. He never corrected them, but there were reasons for his silence. Deep, painful reasons. Back in the 1960s, Thomas was drafted when he was barely 19. He remembered standing in line with 100 other boys, all shaved heads and nervous faces, ready to be molded into soldiers. His training was brutal. Days bled into nights, sweat soaked the dirt, and exhaustion became his only companion. But Thomas didn't quit. He pushed harder and harder, until his superiors began to notice something about him. He wasn't loud. He wasn't flashy, but he had a heart that refused to break. By the time he was 21, Thomas was in a jungle halfway around the world, Vietnam, a war that scarred everyone it touched. He saw things that haunted him forever. Friends blown apart by mines, young soldiers crying for mothers who never came, missions that left him wondering why fate had spared him while others never returned. And yet he kept fighting. He rose through the ranks quietly, never chasing power but always earning respect. There was one night that defined his life. His unit was ambushed. Enemy fire poured down from the trees, lighting up the darkness. Chaos, screams, confusion. Thomas, just a sergeant then, made a decision that would seal his legacy. He carried 2 men on his back while directing fire and covering his unit's retreat. His actions saved dozens. His silence afterward hid the truth, because medals were given for that night. Speeches were made. But Thomas never showed up to accept them. He never wanted applause. He only wanted to remember the faces of those he couldn't save. Decades passed. His hair turned gray. His knees gave out. The world moved on. And yet, inside him, the fire of that young sergeant still burned. But nobody knew. Nobody. Which is why, at that base gate, those young guards saw only an old man with a shaky ID. Not the legend their own generals whispered about in closed rooms. The guard shoved his ID back into his chest. Fake, get lost. Thomas's lips pressed into a thin line. He didn't fight back. He didn't argue. He just stood there, cane trembling, breath slow. One car driver yelled from behind, "Move him out of the way." The humiliation burned. But Thomas stayed calm. His silence made the guards angrier. "You deaf, old man." We said leave. one shouted, stepping closer. Still, Thomas didn't move. He knew something they didn't, that ceremony inside. It wasn't just any memorial. It was for a battalion that had once fought under his command, men who owed their survival to him, though they never knew his name. Thomas whispered again, "I buried brothers here." The guard sneered, "Yeah, sure you did." Minutes passed. The line of cars grew longer, pressure mounted. Some soldiers walking by began to gather, curious. The sight of an old man blocked at the gate spread whispers. Inside, an officer heard the commotion and radioed for someone higher up to intervene. But by then, the disrespect had already spread like wildfire. Thomas stood like stone. The guards stood like wolves, and the crowd watched, waiting for something to break. Then, the sound of boots echoed on the pavement. A convoy approached, black cars, flags, security detail. A 4-star general stepped out, his chest heavy with medals, his presence commanding silence. The guards instantly straightened, saluting, but the general didn't look at them. His eyes locked on the old man with the cane. For a moment, the world froze. The general's jaw trembled. His eyes softened. He walked no march toward Thomas Reed, and then it happened. The general, the highest-ranking man on that base, stopped in front of him. His hands rose. His body stiffened, and with full honor he saluted. The crowd gasped. The guards' faces drained of color. "Permission to welcome you home, Sergeant Major Reed," the general said, his voice breaking. Thomas finally lifted his head. For the first time in decades, he let the world see who he truly was. Silence fell heavy. The guards lowered their eyes, shame burning in their young faces. They had mocked a man whose sacrifices they could never measure. The general took Thomas's frail hand. "You don't need an ID here. This base was built on your blood." Tears welled in Thomas's eyes, but he didn't speak. Words were not his way. Instead, he walked through the gates not as an old man mocked by strangers, but as a soldier finally honored. The salute wasn't just for him. It was for every nameless veteran who carried scars in silence. Every forgotten warrior who never asked for applause, because true honor doesn't shout. It doesn't demand. It simply waits until the world is ready to see it, and that day, at that base gate, the world finally saw Thomas Reed. Stories like this remind us why respect matters. Not all heroes wear their medals on their chest. Some carry their battles quietly, hidden in the lines of their faces and the weight of their steps. If this story touched you, share it. Honor the silent warriors who walk among us every day. Hit the like button if you believe respect should be given, not asked for. Subscribe for more stories that keep their memory alive. And let this video be a reminder next time you see a veteran. Don't wait for the uniform to recognize their sacrifice. Sometimes the greatest heroes look just like ordinary men.